Welcome to a very special edition of the Sharp Angles podcast. This is one of my favorite episodes of the year, and that is because we bring in two of the simply very best, most accurate, historically mock drafters from the country in. These guys are both writing for sharpfootballanalysis.com. And before I introduce them momentarily, I just want you guys to know you can go up to sharpfootballanalysis.com and view their current mock drafts and all the analysis that they have stating why they like a certain player to match up with that team at that selection. But Thursday morning is when the final mocks are due for the Huddle Report. That's where these guys both rank inside the top 3 over the last 5 years in mock draft accuracy. And we will post those mocks up on sharpfootballanalysis.com on Thursday morning. So if you want to find out what they ultimately think at the last second, where they've paired each player to team match, you go up to sharpfootballanalysis.com and check that out on Thursday. Okay, let's dive right into it, guys. We've got Ryan McCrystal on the top of the screen. He's number 3 in mock draft accuracy over the last 5 years. We've got number 1 in mock draft accuracy, Brendan Donahue, right in the middle. I'm, of course, at the bottom of the screen, and I highly encourage you guys follow these guys on Twitter as well. We're going to be doing a lot of other draft content throughout the course of the week, so you guys can keep track of them right now. But gentlemen, I just want to know before we get in, because I want to spend most of this time talking about the draft, but some time, and I think Ryan, maybe you think a little bit differently than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly uncertainty at the very top of the board, which makes us a little bit less confident, but I don't think it's going to be quite as unpredictable as some people are saying, just because if you sort of look at the top 10 as a whole, I think, if I were to list 10 players right now, I think I'd feel very confident about at least 7 or 8 of them. So matching them to teams is always tricky. It's tricky every year, but I don't think we're going to be shocked at necessarily the big picture order in which these guys come off the board.
Brendan, how about you? How do you feel overall about this draft as compared to the last couple?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more uncertainty in this draft. I think we do know overall the top 20, 25 players with some pretty high confidence. But the difference between this year and last year's draft, it seems that there's just not that consensus at each position like there was last year. And last year we knew who the first quarterback was going to be, who the first running back was going to be, wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle. This year, they really don't have that. So even though we might know that a team is going to go offensive tackle with their first pick, we don't know, exactly who that's going to be. It seems to be all in the eye of the beholder this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do for this podcast is I'm going to flip a coin. It's a quarter right here, heads or tails, and Ryan is going to call it in the air. If Ryan is correct, he gets to choose if he wants to go first or second in the mock draft. Does he want to defer or receive the ball? And at that point, we're going to alternate back and forth between Ryan and Brendan picking who they think the team is going to select with the pick. You can throw in some of your logic as to whether or not you feel that they should go in a different direction, but you think ultimately they're going to end up with this particular player. We're going to run through 1 to 32 like that. We're going to have no trades. You can comment if you think it might happen, a trade down or whatnot, but we're going to do this. No trades. I'm keeping track of it here on the spreadsheet, and let's go ahead and get started. So with that said, I'm going to flip this quarter. Ryan, you can see it on the screen. Call it in the air.
Tails.
It is tails.
All right.
Tails is what it was. So, Ryan, what do you want to do?
I want no part of making the number 1 decision, so I'm going to defer and let Brendan handle that one.
I'm afraid.
All right, Brendan, go ahead. You are the Jacksonville Jaguars. You're on the clock. Who do you think they're selecting number 1?
Well, as of this morning, I was going to go Travon Walker. I was going to capitulate to all the reports and the buzz that is the pick. But right before we got on, I saw a tweet from you talking about how it seems that there's a divide in the building. The divide is now between GM and the owner. And the owner is the one who wants Hutchinson. And if you're going to go against your boss, you better be right. And I'm not sure that Trent Baalke has that long of a leash to begin with there. So it's not like the owner is the one that wants him to reach for somebody that's not the consensus top pick. I mean, on draft boards, I track a few different ones, and Hutchinson is the consensus number one pick. I think it's been overblown a bit about how much of a athlete that Travon Walker is, and it's kind of downplayed what the type of athlete that Aidan Hutchinson is. I looked up, he had a 9.87 relative athletic score, which was 19th best ever in the history of the database. I mean, the biggest difference between Hutchinson and Walker in terms of athletic traits is just their arm length, which Balky he does have a history of leaning into that, and that's what he looks for. So if he's going to, risk his job security on about 3 inches of arm length, he might do it. But that report that you just shared earlier today has me thinking that at the end of the day, Hutchinson is still going to be the pick at 1. I know the betting markets changed Hutchinson for the first time since they put out the odds recently, that he's now the second favorite. Walker is now, as of this taping, is now minus 150 on DraftKings to be the number one pick. But I think if push comes to shove there in Jacksonville on draft night, that they still might go Hutchinson with 1.
The last time I refreshed FanDuel, Hutchinson was minus 175 to go number 1. And right now, Travon Walker is minus 175. And for those of you that have been under a rock all day, the reason that Hutchinson is now number 2 and Walker is now number 1 is simply because Peter King released his mock draft last night, which showed that Walker was going to go number 1. Now, it was interesting how he couched it, because he did say, expect a surprise out of the Jaguars. And then he listed that it's most likely in his mind going to be Walker. To me, that's not really a surprise. All the good mock drafts that I've seen have been battling either Hutchinson or Walker. So when a guy is basically 50% likely to go number 1, not the betting markets weren't indicating that, but the mock drafts themselves were suggesting it. That now you'd simply say Walker going first is like this massive surprise. Not today, not as of this week. I mean, maybe a month ago, yes, that would absolutely have been a surprise, but it's not a surprise right now. Let's move on to, so I'm going to mark in here Aidan Hutchinson, and we'll move on to Ryan. You are picking for the Detroit Lions at number 2. Who do you think they're going to select?
Yeah, so if Hutchinson goes number 1, they're going to try to trade down. They're going to make a couple last-minute calls and see if anybody wants to jump up for Walker or maybe Kayvon Thibodeaux. If they stay put, the decision comes down to Travon Walker or Kayvon Thibodeaux, I believe. I don't think they're going to take a quarterback, partially because they have that second first-round pick, and if there's someone that they really love, they know that they can probably jump up in the first round again and potentially end up with 2 picks in the top half of the first round if they feel like they really need a quarterback. So I'm going to assume, since we're not predicting trades, and they probably won't get a good trade offer anyway, that we're deciding between Thibodeaux and Travon Walker here. And I think I'm going to go with Travon Walker because, just piecing together some of the things that GM Brad Holmes has said over the years about how much he values character and how much he values work ethic, I think he might stay away from Thibodeaux and feel like Walker's a little bit of the safer pick. So that's the direction I'm going to go. Just to real quick play devil's advocate and just say the argument for Thibodeaux would be you only get so many opportunities to draft a player like Kayvon Thibodeaux. And in terms of talent and production, there's no comparison between the two. Thibodeaux has been a dominant player in college and Walker has not. So you only get so many options to draft a Kayvon Thibodeaux. And so he may say, yeah, the character is not quite what we want, but let's just take this opportunity to get a stud, and we'll figure out how we fit him into our locker room later. But knowing that is a question mark with Thibodeaux, I'll go with Walker.
All right, Brendan, here we are. Hutchinson is off the board. Walker's off the board. You're picking number 3 for the Houston Texans. What do you think they're going to do on Thursday night?
Well, I'm buying the recent hype. They've done a lot of homework on their cornerbacks. They've met with Sauce Gardner multiple times. They've met with Derek Stingley multiple times. I know it's not typically something that Lovie Smith does, but Nick Caserio coming from Patriots system, when they've had their best defenses, it's usually built around a shutdown corner. So it's hard to be more of a shutdown corner than what Sauce Gardner was in college, seeing as he never gave up a receiving touchdown in his collegiate career. So I'm going to go with Sauce Gardner to the Texans at 3.
Okay, so right now, Gardner is 5.5 under -25 as his draft prop. And, you guys, neither of you had him going in your last mock draft released last week. And so it'll be interesting to see if you end up with him here on Thursday with your final mock draft. People can go to sharkfootballanalysis.com on Thursday to go check it out. So Ahmad Gardner is off the board at 3 overall. Now the Jets are on the board. Joe Douglas with the first of 2 first-round picks, first of 2 top 10 picks. Ryan, what do you think Douglas is going to prioritize with his 4th pick of the draft?
Yeah, so my hunch here with the Jets is they probably want to come out of the first round with an edge rusher and a receiver. And with Kayvon Thibodeaux being on the board still, I think that's a pretty easy selection. They get a premier pass rusher. There's a much bigger drop-off from Kayvon Thibodeaux to the next pass rushers on the board in this scenario than there is with, say, Garrett Wilson to the next wide receivers. He's going to be pretty confident that, assuming we're correct in that thinking that they want to get a wide receiver, even if Wilson's off the board at 10, he'll have another crack at somebody who's going to fit their offense really well. So Thibodeau's a pretty easy decision here.
Okay, so they get their edge rusher right off the board at number 4. We have 3 edge rushers going in the top 4, which is something that we thought might be the case. And Thibodeaux sneaks under his current draft prop, which is 4.5. Now we're down to the Giants. They too have the first of 2 picks in the top 10. In fact, they're going to go 5 and 7. And actually, because of the way we're doing this mock draft, Brendan, you're picking both picks for the Giants. Each of your next 2 picks are going to be for the Giants. So who do you think that they will take at number 5? And it's important to denote that at number 5, this is a big pick because from a draft props perspective, most of these markets that we see up here with which team is going to use their first pick on this position, that matters who they do here, who they take here, because it's only going to count pick 5. It's not going to count their pick 7 in that marketplace. And also the Carolina Panthers are sitting there at pick number 6. And Carolina has been rumored to be going in a variety of different directions. But let's hear what you think that the Giants will do with their 5th pick. And I guess I will sprinkle in here. Do you also agree with Ryan that I know your last mock had Kayvon Thibodeaux going at number 4, that he would be the Jets pick at number 4?
Yeah, absolutely. And a note on his draft prop position, he was 5.5 a few days ago, and he's moved down to 4.5. And I know it's been a popular pick that I've seen from guys that have been putting some money down on this. Thibodeaux has been a top 5 lock for about a week now. So, yeah, I think definitely Jets would be ecstatic to have him at 4.
Okay, and at 5 for the Giants, where do you think they go?
In terms of the Giants, to your point, I think they with Carolina behind them that has such a need at offensive tackle. I mean, if they do prefer, there's 3 that have set themselves apart as the top tier. If there's one that they really prefer, I don't see why they would take a chance that Carolina just stays at 6 and picks that particular lineman. So, I've done an informal survey with some of my buddies that are Giants fans, and the one consensus they say that from these 2 picks that they have at 5 and 7 is that they have to come away with an offensive tackle with one of them. So with that, I'm going to go with Evan Neal actually with their 5th pick. Basically because what the reports are that they want to keep Andrew Thomas at left tackle. Of these 3 guys, the one that has displayed that he can, in fact, play right tackle is Evan Neal. And there is that connection with Dayball to Alabama. So seems like he'd be a safe pick. Just plug and play him at right tackle for his first year. Offensive lineman to be selected first by the Giants is the favorite. It's at minus 120 right now.
Minus at 120. Okay, yeah. I know that's been all over the place. I thought it was at even money at some point, but minus 120. Okay, so That does seem pretty logical if they're trying to steal something from the Carolina Panthers. Ryan, do you agree that that would be what they would be looking to do with pick number 5 is going O-line? And then where do you think the Panthers are going to go at 6 if the Giants did not leapfrog them, but take an O-lineman directly in front of them?
Yeah, going offensive line definitely makes sense. Although I will say in this scenario that we've created for the Giants, where they have their pick of all the offensive linemen, but they may now see, well, if they like 3 of them, you're going to be guaranteed to have someone available at 7. So maybe there's another position, like maybe edge rusher is a position that they now see as more of a premium spot for them to get at number 5. So if they don't go offensive lineman, I think that this would be the scenario where it could happen. But otherwise, yeah, they have to get an offensive line at one of these 2 picks. So now with Carolina, they're kind of in the same situation. I know people are going to bring up quarterback here, but there's no way to justify taking a quarterback because they don't have another pick until the 4th round. So whoever you draft, if you draft a quarterback at 6, you're putting him on the roster right now as is, behind that offensive line as is, and that's going to be an absolute mess. And it's certainly not going to save Matt Rule's job. If he drafts a quarterback at 6, he's fired. So I think first of all, they want to trade down. We know that. They might not be able to. But if they stay put and have to use this pick, it's an offensive lineman. So with Neal off the board, I'm choosing between Charles Cross and Ekwonu. That's a really tough call. I think I'm going to have to go with Ekwonu, though. He seems like maybe a slightly safer pick. I think in the interview process, he's had pretty much rave reviews from everybody. So I think that there's a really good chance Carolina likes him and he'd be a good fit for them there.
So interestingly enough, Evan Neal is plus 150 to be the first offensive lineman selected. Before I toss it back to Brendan to give us the Giants' second pick, I want to ask you, Ryan, do you think that the Giants would go Evan Neal with this 5th pick? If they are O-linemen, do you think that that is their favorite if they have the choice of anybody on the board? Or do you have no speculation on that at this point?
I would probably lean towards Ekwonu, but if I were going to place a percentage on it, I'm pretty close to 33% for all 3 of them. I might be 36% Ekwonu and just ever so slightly lower on the other 2.
Okay, got it. All right, Brendan, now it's back to you. Giants' second pick number 7 overall. Who are they going to draft, do you think?
I think this could be a spot, another place that they could look to trade down if the price is right. I think they want to add some draft capital for next year and what's going to be a more top-heavy quarterback draft class. But if they don't, it sounds like James Bradbury is most likely going to be out the door at some point in this offseason. So I'm going to go with Derek Stingley, who at one point was considered to be not only just the top cornerback coming into this draft class, but potentially the best overall player. So I think they refer back to that 2019 freshman tape that he had, that he was maybe the best cornerback in college as a freshman. And they addressed a new need at cornerback. Stingley's been a pretty popular name lately. His draft positions moved from 12.5 all the way down to 9.5. And as of right now, the under on the 9.5 is at minus 140.
Yeah, it's interesting. He is a heavy favorite. I think it's minus 275 to be the second cornerback drafted off the board. Ahmad Gardner is the favorite to be the first cornerback drafted off the board. And a top 10 pick right now for Stingley is all the way up to minus 200. So he's minus 200 to be a top 10 pick. And as you mentioned, his position prop has dropped all the way down to 9.5. Okay, with the Atlanta Falcons at number 8, Ryan, where do you think they're going to go?
Yeah, this is an interesting spot because there's 3 players that I've highlighted as possible targets for them: Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, and Kyle Hamilton. And they're all still on the board here for Atlanta. So this is a tough scenario to try to predict for them. I'll go with Garrett Wilson, though, partially because wide receiver is the most glaring need on their roster. One of many glaring needs, but easily the worst wide receiver room in the whole league right now. So they can add Garrett Wilson. And then also the other factor here is that even if they don't add a quarterback this year, they're going to add a quarterback next year. And so getting a premier talented wide receiver onto the roster potentially pairing him with Calvin Ridley, assuming he comes back after his suspension, and then also with Kyle Pitts, you'd be putting a rookie quarterback either later in the draft this year or next year in a really good spot to succeed, I think, a year from now. So I think that is probably the safest route that they could go. So I'll go with Garrett Wilson at number 8.
Let me ask you this. From the prop market, we've got Garrett Wilson. He is minus 200 to be a top 10 pick. He is plus 120 to be the first overall receiver selected. And his draft position is 9.5, with the under being juiced at plus 100. What would be, out of those three options, what would be your favorite way to play Garrett Wilson if we do think he could go at number 8 to the Seahawks?
Yeah, my favorite way to play that would be to take him to be the first wide receiver off the board. And the way that I come to that conclusion is try to put yourself in the GM shoes, because it's easy for any one of us analysts to say, like, we really like Jameson Williams. That's kind of the other name that's out there that a lot of people like. And it's easy for us to say that, or for fantasy analysts to have him as their number one receiver, because if he's healthy, that's totally realistic. But when you're the general manager, there's consequences for being wrong. And so let's say you like Jameson Williams, the injury's out there. What's the chance that it affects his career? Even if you think it's only like 5 to 10%, like that's still fairly significant. It could affect his career. And now, how much better do you think he is than Garrett Wilson? He's not more than 5 to 10% better than Garrett Wilson. No one's going to argue that, because they're very similar players. So I think that almost everyone will agree Garrett Wilson is the number one wide receiver on the board. I think very good chance that Atlanta, maybe the Jets, maybe Washington, or someone trading up into that range makes Wilson the first receiver off the board.
All right, Brendan, the Seattle Seahawks are on the clock at number 9. Who do you think that they are going to draft?
Well, our colleagues at Sharp Football Analysis have been doing a great job with all the team needs. For Seahawks, they have it at quarterback, offensive tackle, edge, and secondary as their top 4. I never really got the impression, though, that Seattle's going to seriously consider a quarterback here at 9. So with Charles Crossdell on the board, I think they're going to address the offensive line here, as he's the last of the top tier of offensive tackles here. And the offensive line is the favorite to be the first position selected by Seattle at plus 175.
Okay, so a little bit of value there. Now, if he does go at 9, he's going over his draft prop of 7.5. But you could get Seattle O-line, as you just mentioned there. So now it's back to the Jets, and it's Ryan, your chance to pick who you think that the Jets are going to draft here. You picked them drafting Kayvon Thibodeaux with number 4. Now you get number 10. Where do you think Joe Douglas goes here?
Yeah, so based on the scenario we've created where they've already addressed edge rusher, we're obviously not going to consider Jermaine Johnson, who's on the board, and in other scenarios, which could certainly be a pick for them here. But with that position out of the way, first, they're probably going to trade down. They'd like to acquire some more draft capital. But staying put, I think Jameson Williams makes sense. Now, I just made the case for why Jameson Williams wouldn't be the first receiver off the board. But partially, I mean, a big part of that is how similar he and Garrett Wilson is. So if you're deciding if you like that type of receiver, you're going to side with the healthy guy with really similar traits. But now you're in a situation where you're comparing Jameson Williams to the, bigger, slower, more of the possession receiver in Drake London, or sort of the like big slot guy, a guy who does damage after the catch, but not really a threat downfield, and Treylon Burks. Or Chris Olave, who's not really a threat after the catch, which I think kind of rules him out for the Jets, who definitely want somebody who can do damage on those short, quick passes. And for that reason, just looking at the type of receiver they want, I think Jameson Williams is just a great fit for that offense. And they'll just roll the dice with the injury, with Garrett Wilson being off the board.
So if Williams does go here, he is plus 120 to go top 10. And I want to ask you, I have my suspicions what you're going to choose, but his over under right now, it was 12.5. It is now down to 11.5, but it's even money to go under. So you go under 11.5 or at even money plus 100, or you go plus 120 to go top 10. Where do you think the value is best?
Yeah, I mean, with those being so close together, I think just betting the top 10 prop clearly makes the most sense.
Okay. So now we're to the Washington Commanders, their first selection of the day, their only selection of the day. Where do you think they go, Brendan?
Well, last year's winner of the Huddle Report, Josh Norris, came up with a great nugget for them about Ron Rivera and his drafting philosophy. Basically, if he goes to your pro day, there's a very good chance that he is going to end up selecting you. He went to Ohio State's pro day to look at Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. With Garrett Wilson already off the board at 8, I'm going to go with Chris Olave, Ohio State receiver, to the Commanders.
And that was the interesting element here that I was kind of leaning into, and that was if Washington might go wide receiver, you could get Jameson Williams under 11.5. It's still plus 100, and be okay if they go for Jameson Williams. However, the biggest question we now have to ask based on your nugget is, did Ron Rivera go to Jameson? I don't even know. Did he have a pro day? He's recovering from his ACL. His videos have looked incredible. I think he's well ahead of his where everybody thought he was going to be at this point. But has there been any whispers of Rivera or Washington linked to Williams whatsoever?
Not really that I've seen.
Okay. All right. Now we're to the Minnesota Vikings. Ryan, who do you think they're going to pick at number 12?
So this is a really good scenario for the Vikings because they've got some good options on the board that fits their needs. And they're also in a position where a team may be tempted to trade up. And I think knowing that they're a very analytically minded front office, they would probably feel really comfortable moving down a few spots and still coming away with a really good player who's high on their board. So they'll try to trade down. If they stay put, I think it's going to come down to Trent McDuffie, Kyle Hamilton, or Jermaine Johnson is still on the board, who we've mentioned a couple times for a couple teams. I don't think edge rusher is a high priority for them, but they're certainly not going to pass over a great player just because it's not the perfect position match for them. So they would consider him. But in this scenario, I think they'll stick with cornerback and go with Trent McDuffie. It fits their needs really well. McDuffie is viewed as a very safe player, which I think, analytically minded front offices tend to go that route. Anytime you got a guy who's viewed as a very safe pick based on the intangibles and everything, and you can pair that with a guy who also tests really well, I think McDuffie checks a lot of boxes for them and is a strong possibility.
Okay, so we've got 3 consecutive players who are going under their draft prop and going earlier than their expected draft position based on grinding the mocks average of a lot of different mock drafts. Now we're back to the Houston Texans, who with their first pick selected Sauce Gardner, the cornerback out of Cincinnati, and now they have their second pick of this first round. This is also the first time that they've had well above average draft capital for years, so they really need to make this pick matter. Who do you think they're going to draft at 13 overall, given this current board, Brendan?
Yeah, I think edge is definitely in consideration for them at 3. So with Jermaine Johnson still on the board here at 13, I think he would be the pick. I think some teams are going to be turned off by his age. He's a little bit on the older side of all the prospects in this class. But Nick Caserio coming from the Patriots, that's not an issue for them. In fact, they actually tend to lean more towards the older prospects. So I think this is where his floor might be at 13 with the Texans.
Okay, so that's his floor. And now we'll go with the Baltimore Ravens. Ryan, who do you think the Ravens are going to draft at 14 with a lot of different options here on the board for them?
Yeah, there's a bunch of good options on the board for Baltimore. This is a really good scenario for them. In the scenario we're creating here, we've got Kyle Hamilton falling a little bit further than I think he's expected to. And I think although it's not a glaring need for Baltimore, they would very much have to consider it. Jordan Davis is also there, but I'm going to go maybe a little bit of more of a need-based approach here and go with Trevor Penning, the offensive tackle from Northern Iowa. I think he fits their scheme really well. He's a great run blocker. Obviously, we know that's a priority for them. They did sign Morgan Moses to a contract this offseason, but I think that was more of like a let's get somebody in here just in case the draft doesn't fall our way type of signing. And they could move on from him after 1 year. So with Penning being on the board, I think that there's a pretty decent chance that this is the floor for Trevor Penning.
And interestingly enough, obviously the Baltimore Ravens, they have not yet signed Lamar Jackson to an extension, but he's going to be making significantly more this year on the tag. And then if they do sign him, it's going to be a significant investment into that quarterback position for a guy who is in the pocket an awful lot. You definitely want to protect him and keep him upright. We know there's splits when he's not out there versus when he is. The Eagles have 2 first-round picks. They made a trade with the Saints a few weeks ago, so now they sit at pick 15 and pick 18. Ryan gets to do pick 18 for Howie Roseman. Brendan, you get to do pick 15. What do you think he is going to do on Thursday night?
I think with the first pick, Howie Roseman is going to go back to the well for a 3rd year in a row with wide receiver. Try to make up with the Jalen Reagor miss. He's hit on Devontae Smith last year. And a nice compliment to him that's still on the board would be Drake London.
Okay, so Drake has slipped down the board a little bit here. His draft prop was at 10.5. And I've seen some drafts where some mocks where he was the first wide receiver off the board. In fact, we have him as the 4th wide receiver off the board in this draft. I'm going to toss it to you for what you think the Saints are going to do, Ryan, but do you think that Drake London is potentially going to be the 4th wide receiver off the board, or do you think that we've undervalued him a little bit?
No, I think this is very realistic. I mean, just look at how the draft usually falls. The guys who run the fastest go higher. So Drake London is very talented for the type of receiver that he is, but that type of receiver just isn't as valued as much in most offenses. There's certainly an argument to be made that, Ron Rivera has liked big receivers in the past. Maybe Washington takes him. You could also argue that he's a good fit for Arthur Smith's offense in Atlanta, so he could go number 8 overall. Like there's certainly scenarios where he could go much higher than this, but if he falls, we should not be surprised.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure if it was Peter King who had him going much earlier in his mock than I was anticipating, but we're now to the New Orleans Saints at pick number 16. Ryan, where do you think they go?
Yeah, man, we've created a really tough situation for me here because obviously we've got some quarterbacks on the board. We've also got Kyle Hamilton falling much further than he probably would in most scenarios. I guess I'm going to go with a quarterback here. I'm not sure if the Saints are going to trade up for a quarterback. Obviously, that's speculated a lot, but I think they might be in a situation where they stay put and they just say, all right, if he falls to us, great, let's take him. And if not, that's okay too. But in this scenario that we've created, Malik Willis is on the board, and I think he has the traits that the Saints have shown to like. Obviously, they kind of rolled the dice and tried to figure something out with Taysom Hill and his extremely enticing athletic ability at quarterback. It hasn't quite worked out. I think also the fact that they went and got Jameson or Jameis Winston was maybe tips their hand a little bit, or what type of quarterback they want that next guy to be. Obviously, Winston's not the athlete running the ball that Willis is, but he certainly has the traits with his arm. And so if the Saints go quarterback, I think Willis is probably the preferred route they would go just because of those raw traits. It kind of opens up your offense a lot. So with him sitting there on the board, I don't have a huge amount of confidence. Maybe they're not going to go quarterback at all this year. But obviously they've done their homework on all of these guys. And so we know they're at least talking about it. So I'll go with Malik Willis at number 16.
So prior to this, the last time a quarterback went as low as pick number 16 was the 2013 NFL draft, where the Buffalo Bills selected E.J. Manuel from that terrible class at pick number 16. So we've got the Saints duplicating that with going Malik Willis at pick number 16. No quarterbacks going in the top 15. And you got to think that the Chargers love that selection, Brendan, because most of these teams that are picking lower are rooting for a lot of quarterbacks to go ahead of them, particularly the Chargers. They already have Justin Herbert. So the Saints not stealing another offensive lineman or something like that away from the Chargers is definitely something that they would applaud and run with their draft card up. So who do you think is going to be on that draft card when they turn it in at pick number 17?
Yeah, to your point, I think the one that they are disappointed that went already is Trevor Penning, 14 to Baltimore. They do have a need at the right side, both at right tackle and right guard. Since the right tackle the next right tackle is gone for them in Penning, I think they just switched to right guard with Zion Johnson.
Okay, and Zion, both of you guys actually had them going Zion in your mock drafts from last week. And so, if I'm not mistaken, that marks the 5th offensive lineman to go in the first round. And what was that prop? 7.5? I thought it was 7.5 for the offensive line. So we're definitely well on our way to that. And now we're back to the Philadelphia Eagles, Ryan, at pick number 18, their second pick of this first round. Where do you think Howie Roseman goes here?
All right. Well, I didn't even write this down on my little I made like a little small board for each team to prepare for this, and I didn't even write this name down. But Kyle Hamilton's on the board, and by the time the 18th pick rolls around, they're not. I just can't see them passing on him. That's just too much of a value, even if it's not a position that they're like necessarily trying to get from this first round. I think at this point they just can't walk. They just can't turn their back on him. So it's going to be Kyle Hamilton, just purely based on value at this point.
Yeah, he has slipped far. He had an expected draft position of 11.7 in the average of the mocks from grinding the mock. His over-under for draft prop is at 10.5. Obviously, that has been slipping considerably. But you finally have the first safety off the board of the draft at pick number 18. And now we are back to the Saints. Brandon, your opportunity here to make a selection. They went quarterback at number 16 in our scenario. So where do you think they go at number 19?
Yeah, with quarterback at 16, I'm going to go. I think they do want to address the offensive line with one of these two picks. They lost Terron Armstead this offseason. A bit of a project, but I think Tyler Smith makes some sense here. I think he does project to be a guard, at least in his rookie year. But they could use help all along the line. So they'll go Tyler Smith, plug him in at guard, and hopefully he develops into left tackle of the future for them.
Okay, so we go Tyler Smith here. I will throw it over to Ryan now. You got the Pittsburgh Steelers on the board at pick number 20. Malik Willis has gone already. A need for them was quarterback. So they have their choice of any other quarterbacks on the board. If they so desire, where do you think they go with pick number 20?
Yeah, this is tough. I don't like being the guy that has to pick the quarterbacks because if I were the one making the decision, I would not be taking either of these guys in the first round. But it seems like Pittsburgh is feeling desperate. It seems like Kevin Colbert, with this, being his last year at GM, it seems like he wants to sort of set up his successor in a good spot with the quarterback. I'm not sure he'll actually put him in a good spot with the quarterback based on this selection, but I think he's going to go with Kenny Pickett. It's probably the safe choice. Pittsburgh's a fairly conservative organization when it comes to the draft. So Pickett would be sort of the conservative choice at quarterback. You can pretty safely say that he's going to be an Andy Dalton kind of quarterback in the league. I don't know that his ceiling is any higher than that at all. So it's not an exciting pick, but I don't think he's going to embarrass them if you put him out there as your starter for the next few years. So I'll go with Kenny Pickett, not feeling super confident about it because it's very justifiable for them to pass and just punt this decision on to next year's draft. But it seems like they're probably going quarterback.
So in our scenario here, we have two quarterbacks off the board. The first is pick 16 to the Saints. The second is pick 20 to the Steelers. Both these quarterbacks had over-unders on their draft props currently of 10.5 or 12.5. You can go over 12.5 for Kenny Pickett at minus 145. And Willis, you can go over 10.5 at minus 130. So you could actually go and hit both of those with relatively low juice if you wanted to take both of the quarterback overs. Let's pause for a second here since you just answered a question, Ryan. I'm going to ask Brendan first, and I'm going to come back to you. Looking at our draft board, if you're looking at this shared screen and you see who's gone to which teams, in this first 20, who do you think would be having the best draft if they drafted exactly the way that this board is? Which team do you think would feel the best?
I think Eagles, if they were to come away with Drake London and Kyle Hamilton, I think they'd be pretty happy with this draft so far.
Okay, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, that's the easy choice. They get a steal in Hamilton, and plus it's always easy to lean towards the team that comes away with 2 good players in the top 20. I think any of the teams that picked an offensive tackle, though, I think all of those teams that we paired with the O-lineman filled a need and got a really good player. They'd certainly be considered winners as well.
Okay, excellent. All right, so now we're down to pick number 21. Ryan, you've got the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick on the clock for the first time in this draft. Where do you think he goes with pick 21?
I think
this is actually Brendan, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brendan. Go ahead.
No problem. So Patriots, well-respected beat reporter Mike Reese recently said that he thinks Bill's number 1 preference for this draft, or for this spot at 21, is to trade back. But to be fair, I think that's Bill's preference pretty much every year coming into the draft, that he wants to trade down and accumulate more picks. But if he stays at 21, I think, especially with Devin Lloyd still on the board, he fills the need. They have Dante Hightower still unsigned. So he would be my pick for the Patriots at 21.
Okay, so the Patriots going with the versatile linebacker out of Utah at pick number 21. And now you have a very interesting pick for a lot of fans, both in Green Bay and nationwide, in my opinion, because a lot of us, they lost Devontae Adams, but they got back Aaron Rodgers. And do they try to appease Aaron Rodgers here? And so there's going to be so much hype once the Patriots turn in their card and the Packers are on the clock to see this first player that the Packers are going to draft. They do pick again at number 28. They also could package these picks and try to trade up the board to select somebody else if they so desired. I think that would be silly. I think they need to go with 2 picks in the first round here. But if that we don't know what's going to happen there. We're not projecting trades in this mock. So Ryan, with pick number 22, the first of 2 in the first round, where do the Green Bay Packers go?
Yeah, based on where the board falls, this is pretty easy. They're going to take Treylon Burks. Aaron Rodgers has always done really well when he has a guy in the slot who can get open quickly, and obviously they prefer that to be a guy who does damage after the catch, and Burks does both of those things exceptionally well. He regularly played in the slot at Arkansas. He's the type of receiver who, once the ball's in his hand, he looks like a running back, the way he runs with the ball. So he's going to be a great fit for Aaron Rodgers because he excels on those routes from the slot. And then Green Bay is going to love the damage that he can do after the catch because he's so dangerous in that area. Even though he's not a speedster, I don't think that's a problem because just of the way that he runs with the ball. I think his game translates really well. I think it's a very high probability that Green Bay likes him. And in this scenario that we've created, he's really the last of that top tier of receivers on the board. So it becomes a pretty easy decision.
And his draft position prop is 23.5 with the under at only -110. So he's right ahead of that number. They basically are pairing that right between the Cardinals, who pick next, and the Dallas Cowboys, who pick at 24. So you do have a couple of wide receiver position needy teams sitting right under 23.5 for some value there and opportunities to get Burks if that does end up happening. So with pick number 23 and a wide receiver going off the board there to the Green Bay Packers at number 22, Brendan, where do you think that the Arizona Cardinals may turn?
Yeah, I probably would have gone Burks there. There's some reports that Arizona would like to give Kyler another weapon. But with him off the board, I'm going to switch to defense and fill a need that Chandler Jones just left for them. I'll go George Karlaftis, the edge out of Purdue. I've heard that he's kind of dropping down boards, but he's got a lot of metrics that teams typically look for. So I still expect him to go in the first round, even though there's some rumors out there. I think Tony Pauline said he's hearing that he might slip down to the second round, but he feels a pretty big need for Arizona.
His draft prop was at 19.5. I'm now seeing it down to 22.5. It would still be going over if he slipped to 23. But that's where Karlaftis definitely has seen some movement in the market recently. Now we're down to Jerry Jones. Where do you think Jerry Jones is going to go at pick number 24, Ryan?
Yeah, I think this board has actually fallen not very favorably for Dallas because they're a candidate to take a receiver, but the big 5 names are all off the board. They're also probably in the market for offensive line help, and we've seen a bunch of those guys come off the board. But fortunately, there's one name left, and that's Kenyon Green, who could play guard or right tackle, depending on where you want to try him out. I think that flexibility is certainly appealing to Dallas, knowing that they like, guys who can be like maulers in the run game. I think they're going to like Kenyon Green. So they're probably not too disappointed that he's on the board, but they would certainly like more options. But in this scenario, I think it's pretty easy. He's really the only guy left who's probably in their top tier of players they're targeting.
Yeah, so let's see. At this point, we are at pick number 24. We've had 4 tackles go. We've had Zion Johnson, interior offensive lineman, go. We've had Tyler Smith go, and we've had Kenyon Green go. So that's 7 offensive linemen at this point, and we're at pick number 24 again. That draft prop was at 7.5. Let me just double check what the juice is there. 7.5. Under was minus 200. Over was plus 155. So if another O lineman slips in here and you bet over 7.5, you would have a nice plus 155 there. But we're down to the Buffalo Bills at pick number 25. They have Josh Allen for 1 more year at a very reasonable cap hit before that thing starts to take off, similar to what Patrick Mahomes is seeing. Now, that said, the salary cap itself is going to start to increase dramatically as well moving into the future. But this is the last year that they have Josh Allen on a cheap cap hit. Who do you think they take in the first round, Brendan?
I know they've been linked to running back a lot, at least recently. But if I remember correctly, they were linked to running back in the first round last year as well. And I didn't really buy it last year, and I'm not going to buy it from a team like Buffalo again this year. I think they have bigger needs, specifically in the secondary. So one of the most versatile defensive backs in the draft is Daxton Hill. He can come in and play nickel corner right away. And then they have Jordan Poyer as a free agent after the season. So he's insurance if he leaves next offseason too.
Okay, so that's safety number 2 off the board. And the safety prop was 1.5. With the over being juiced at minus 285. So we've got 2 going in the first 25. And that puts us down to the Tennessee Titans at number 26. And it might shock some people, but Ryan Tannehill has the largest cap hit of any player in the NFL this year. They've lost several offensive linemen. They need some help there, but they also need some help at other places, even though this was the team with the number 1 seed in the AFC last year. Where do you think the Tennessee Titans go at pick 26, Ryan?
This is a tough one because the board has also not fallen very well for them. Now, if they want a quarterback, Desmond Ridder is out there. That's definitely a possibility, and I had them going there in my last mock draft. I think I'm going to go a different direction, though, in this one, based on a guy that's fallen down the board maybe a little bit further than a lot of people are expecting. That's Jordan Davis, the nose tackle from Georgia. He's a kind of a polarizing player because he tested so well at the combine, but when you look back at his production at Georgia, it's sort of there in spurts, but he was playing, regularly playing only 20 to 25 snaps per game. So if he falls this far, that's going to be the reason that teams are worried that he's just a first and second down run defender. But for Tennessee, for one, we're down now at the back end of the first round. So there's not as much of a risk as some of those teams would be taking if you're drafting him like, Seattle or Baltimore, or some other teams that much higher that have been potentially linked to him. So there's less of a risk. It also clearly fills a need. They need a nose tackle. They don't have a lot of depth there. So the fact that it fits a need and also could be viewed as a value at this point in the draft, I think that they would have to consider him if he is still on the board.
Okay, so now we're down to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, similar to the Tennessee Titans, this is obviously a team that's been to the playoffs multiple years in a row, thanks to Tom Brady, who is back again, who has a much higher cap hit this year than he's had in years past. And it's also a team that has surprisingly many needs for this draft. So they're picking at number 27. Brendan, where do you think they're going to go?
Yeah, they do have a couple needs. I thought offensive line would be where they would go, but with a lot of the top guys off, I think they switched to the D line. I'm going to go Logan Hall to slide in next to Vita Vea there, defensive tackle.
Okay, so they nabbed Logan Hall, and now it's back to the Green Bay Packers. You made their pick, Ryan, at number 22, where they went Treylon Burks at wide receiver. Who do you think they're going to go to at number 28?
Yeah, so since they already grabbed wide receiver, there's not as much pressure on them with this pick. They can sort of take a best available player approach, I think. And so I think the direction they might go based on who's available would be Arnold Ebiketie, the pass rusher from Penn State. He's a guy that could come in. Maybe isn't an every down player for them right away, but I do think that he would contribute as a pass rusher in some sub packages immediately, and certainly has the potential to grow into a much more well-rounded player.
Okay, so they're going Ebiketie there at pick number 28. Now we've got the Kansas City Chiefs, who are not used to having this much draft capital, Brendan, and they are now picking 2 picks back-to-back in the first round, pick number 29 and then pick number 30. So where do you think they're going to go at pick number 29?
Yeah, with 2 picks back-to-back, I expect them to address the pass game on both sides of the ball. Most obvious is filling a need wide receiver with the departure of Tyreek Hill. I'm going to go with the consensus 6th wide receiver on the board, and that's Jahan Dotson.
Okay, so Jahan Dotson, this is a guy that both of you guys, in fact, suggested that the Chiefs would take at number 29. And let me ask you this question. A lot of the mocks that I have seen have the Chiefs going, since they pick back-to-back, with a wide receiver first. And then at pick number 30, typically it's been a player on the defensive side of the ball, an edge rusher. We'll see if that's where Ryan ends up going here. But do you think that there is any specific reason why they would want to take that wide receiver first? Because obviously you're going to end up paying slightly more at that draft position just because of where you're getting slotted. And of course, as we're betting on these players, it does play into it when we're talking about these team draft specials and the exact position of the first player drafted. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, wide receiver is plus 120, but an edge or any other defensive lineman is all the way down at plus 300. So you would get a lot of value if they happen to select that edge player first. Ryan, any thought? Your last draft also showed Jahan Dotson going here, a wide receiver like Brendan's, as to why they might go with that wide receiver? Or is there any chance that they would slip in this defensive edge rusher?
Yeah, I mean, if they stay put at those picks, you just flip a coin. I have no idea who's going to come off the board first. But if you were betting it, I think that it would probably be safer to go betting with the wide receiver because they do have some extra draft capital they could trade up, and because there is sort of like a clear-cut top 5 and then a bit of a drop-off before you get to Dotson at 6, and then a much bigger drop-off once you get to 7, 8, and 9, it would make a lot of sense for them to try to move up into like the late teens, early 20s to grab one of those top 5, or just to make sure that they get Dotson. Especially in the scenario that we created, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded up a few slots. Like we have the 5th wide receiver coming off the board. Where was it? The Packers at 22.
Yep.
Yeah. So knowing that you've got, the Bills could maybe justify a receiver, the Titans could maybe justify a receiver, maybe the Chiefs try to jump ahead of those guys. And if they do jump up for somebody, it's probably a wide receiver. So if you're betting, I would factor that into your equation and maybe lean wide receiver for their first pick. But now that I'm on the clock making the decision for them at number 30, they've got a lot of great options on the defensive side of the ball. The player I'm going to go with is David Ojabo. The same guy that I have in my most recent mock draft, the pass rusher from Michigan, who a couple months ago we were talking about being a top 10 pick until he had the Achilles injury. My reason for not projecting him to drop out of the first round is if you're a team like the Chiefs, you have no intention of ever owning a pick inside the top 20 for the next 10 years, ideally. So you don't get an opportunity to add a David Ojabo on a rookie contract to your roster. This is your shot. He's injured, and you might not get him for this year, but then you've got him for 4 more years after that on his rookie contract. This is your chance to add a premier player with a draft pick. And in the next foreseeable future, you don't anticipate ever having a shot at a player like this again. So I think they're a team that's going to probably be willing to bite the bullet on maybe getting no production from him for a year, knowing that they don't get opportunities to draft this type of talent.
Okay, so Ojabo goes at pick number 30. It is interesting to note, you mentioned the trade up potential for the Chiefs. It seems like the logical teams that they would want to jump right there, obviously, are the Packers and the Cardinals. And then, like you mentioned, you do have the Titans in that mix as well. So, and the Cowboys potentially. So I think the Patriots, that team that has been willing to trade down, the Steelers may be desperate to grab a quarterback there at 20, so they probably are less likely. But you could either go that second pick for the Saints. The Eagles have traded down in the past. If Kyle Hamilton was there and it is a need for them, probably less likely for them to be willing to trade back. But those teams, the Eagles, the Saints, and then the Patriots, certainly teams that could be in the mix for the Chiefs to pair up with as draft partners there. Okay, now we've got the
just quickly to that point.
Yep.
I think that is the logic behind, because the Chiefs to draft a wide receiver first is the heavy favorite. They are plus 120 to draft a wide receiver first, whereas defensive lineman and edge is plus 300 and defensive back is plus 350. So I think that's the logic, because as you said, they have all three of those needs, and it's kind of a coin flip which one, if they stay at 29 and 30, it's kind of a coin flip as which one they would pick first. But I think that's the logic as to why wide receiver is such a heavy favorite, is because they are definitely a team that could target somebody with a trade up.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So now we're down to the Super Bowl runner-up, the Cincinnati Bengals, picking up pick 31. Brendan, where do you think they're rolling?
Yeah, they've done. We all saw in the Super Bowl in their run towards it that their biggest liability was offensive line. They've done a great job of addressing that this off season. One of the additions they made was Ted Karras, who can play center or left guard. He played left guard last year for the Patriots. So they have the ability to keep him there at left guard and then just kind of round out their last piece on the offensive line with Tyler Linderbaum.
Okay, so we did get that 8th offensive lineman in here at the end with Tyler Linderbaum. Now we are to the Lions, the final pick of the first round. There's been rumors that they could go quarterback here. You get this player with the 5th-year option. I will note that although that's a great selling point for wanting to take a quarterback here, most of these quarterbacks you're not using that 5th-year option on. And if you do end up using that 5th-year option, it's because you're in quarterback purgatory, basically, and you don't think this guy's your guy, but you don't really have another great option. And so you're using that 5th-year option. Otherwise, you're going to try to extend him before then to save some money, because the 5th-year option obviously costs a lot. Now, I guess in Lamar Jackson's situation, who was a late trade up, they are using that 5th-year option wisely. I will say, though, if they didn't have the 5th-year option, Lamar would have just gone and they would have extended him by this point in time anyway. So the Detroit Lions here, Ryan, the final pick of our mock draft, where do you think they go?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, quarterback is certainly an option. It could also be an option for somebody to trade up if somebody else likes a quarterback here. That there's certainly going to be that discussion, especially since we only have 2 off the board so far. So there are teams out there who like Ritter and have a first-round grade on him. So based on this scenario, it would not shock me at all if either Detroit, if they happen to be one of the teams that like him, or somebody else trades into this slot, because obviously there is some value in getting that 5th-year option. Not necessarily for the 5th year specifically. It's really about like the 3rd, 4th year. You don't have to make a decision after year 3 if you have the 5th-year option. You can make a decision after year 4 and then do the extension. Whereas, otherwise it's after year 3 and you're entering in the final year of the contract. You're kind of forced to make a decision at that point, which teams like to try to avoid, especially when you're drafting the quarterbacks in this class, who you've got basically 0 expectations for any of these guys in year 1. So you're going to be entering year 2 just learning about them for the first time. So this is a year where maybe that option matters more than most if you're considering quarterback in round 1.
Good point.
In this scenario, I'm not going to go quarterback. I've had that in my mock draft at some point. It's certainly a possibility for the Lions, but there's 2 Georgia defenders still on the board, linebacker Nakobe Dean and safety Lewis Seen, who I think are both going to be Dan Campbell type of players who have gotten rave reviews throughout the interview process and from the Georgia staff. I'll go with Lewis Seen. He feels a little bit more of a need, I think. He's played a lot in the deep secondary for them. Detroit does a lot of 2 safety looks last year, but he has some flexibility. He's good against the run. He can come up into the box. I think he's the type of guy that Dan Campbell would love to have as a leader on his defense.
Okay, so that rounded out the first round. What I do like to do is then go back and look at some of these things. We got it up on the screen where we can compare EDP, expected draft position, to what you guys actually did, as well as the prop. So it looks like one of the guys that we drafted much earlier than he's currently being forecast is Logan Hall there, the defensive tackle, filling that need on the defensive line for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Also going much earlier than other people on Tyler Smith, the offensive lineman out of Tulsa. His draft prop is 31.5. You have him going off the board at pick number 19, 10.5 positions earlier than expected based upon mock drafts. We also are early on Zion Johnson. His draft prop is 24.5. We have him going to the Chargers at 17 and earlier than his expected draft position, as well as Chris Olave, who is going number 11 to the Washington Commanders in our scenario here. So in all these scenarios, we're going earlier on those specific players, multiple offensive linemen going earlier in our mock draft. Then some of the guys that are slipping later. Naturally, we've got Malik Willis. He is slipping. His draft prop is 10.5. We've got Drake London, the wide receiver out of USC. His draft prop is 10.5, but his expected draft position, there's a big discrepancy between those two. The mock drafters are slating him right around 16.5, but the draft prop is all the way up at 10.5. And you guys are agreeing with more of the mock drafters in that he is not going to be that top 10 draft pick. You guys are also lower on Kyle Hamilton. Obviously, we discussed about the Eagles grabbing him as he was slipping down the board in the first round. His draft prop was 10.5. His expected draft position was 11.7. He goes off the board at pick number 18. The guy who slips the most in our draft is Jordan Davis. He had an expected draft position of 16.5. He's going at pick number 26 to the Titans. His prop is 15.5. So he's slipping down the board tremendously there as well. And, of course, Kenny Pickett there with a 12.5 draft prop, and he is going pick number 22, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with all this laid out in front of you guys, let me throw this question out. Lost two questions. First, who is the biggest surprise, whether he went too early or too late in this mock draft, the way this scenario is playing out? And then I'll follow it up with one more question. So, Brendan, go ahead, go first. Which of these guys is the biggest surprise for you?
Jordan Davis for me. I'd have a hard time seeing him fall all the way to 26. I do think he's going to end up somewhere closer to that draft prop position. There's a lot of teams in that spot: Eagles, Ravens, Texans, Chargers that could all use him. So I don't expect him to fall quite that far on draft night.
Okay, and Ryan, same question.
Yeah, I think Kyle Hamilton is probably a little bit more surprising to me, just because once you get just slightly outside the top 10, there's a bunch of teams that could justify him filling maybe not a primary need, but a secondary need. And then also just once you get into that range, the value starts to become part of the conversation. So this team, Washington could take him, Minnesota could take him, Houston, maybe even Baltimore. And then obviously, like eventually we had him landing with Philadelphia. So I don't think he's going to fall any further than we had him, but if he does slide outside the top 10, there's a lot of good options for him.
Okay. And then my second question is, we've discussed this briefly, but which team do you think would be most disappointed in themselves and the way the draft fell if they walk away in the first round with this particular selection? Who was hoping for a better player, but the draft board broke a poor way for them, and they wound up with somebody that they didn't necessarily love as much as they should drafting in the first round? I'll go with you, Ryan, first on that one.
Yeah, I guess I would have to say probably the Bucs. I mean, if they're drafting Logan Hall, they're purely drafting based off need. And the fact that Ndamukong Suh is a free agent and they need to plug somebody in there, that would be purely a need-based selection for them, especially if the draft played out and they're staring at Jordan Davis potentially falling to them. I think that would maybe be a little bit easier to justify that you're blending need and value if Davis slid one slot further than we had him. But, because they're a Super Bowl contender, sometimes those teams do draft for need. So it was a realistic pick by Brendan. But I do think that it could be a pick you look back at a couple years down the road as saying like, yeah, that there really wasn't a lot of long-term value there.
And that would be especially brutal if Jordan Davis is plummeting down the board and you think you might be able to get him, and then he goes to the team right in front of you. Let's go to you, Brendan. Which team do you think is going to be the most disappointed if the draft goes this way?
I'm going to go Chargers. I think they would much prefer to fill the need at right tackle than right guard at 17. I think if it falls that way, especially with the top 4 receivers off the board as well, they would most likely rather trade back than stay at 17 and take a guard.
Okay. Very fair. Well, we have so much more draft content for you guys over the course of the rest of this week up at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Be sure to tune in next Thursday morning where you can find Ryan and Brendan's final mock drafts as they enter them into the mock draft contest over at the Huddle Report. So check in on Thursday to see those, and good luck consuming the rest of the content and preparing for the draft this Thursday. It's going to be a great week.